You're watching Late Stage Yu-Gi-Oh! My name's Alessio, and I am going to show you how I tied for first place at my local GOAT format tournament by taking Exodia and sending it to the graveyard. If you've been watching the channel, you may know that I live in Austin, Texas, and on Sundays in Austin, at Pixel Haven Gaming and Collectibles, we play old format Yu-Gi-Oh! We alternate every week between GOAT format and Edison format. We have a great crew up there, great players. If you're subscribed to Beast Beats on YouTube, he plays with us up there. If you're not subscribed to Beast Beats, you absolutely should subscribe. He makes really cool old format videos. And the last time that I got first place in one of our GOAT format tournaments, I made a little video deck profile. The deck was called Tomato Pression, and we got a good number of people check that video out. We got lots of y'all letting us know that you thought the deck was cool and that you would be interested in more GOAT format stuff. So here we are. This is the Exodia deck that I piloted into a first place tie last Sunday with Vic. We had an awesome first round match that ended in a draw, and both of us went undefeated after that. Short little disclaimer I want to get out of the way up front. This Exodia deck is an Exodia deck. You win the game by drawing all 5 pieces of Exodia the Forbidden One. There is a good amount of random chance in there. I am not telling you that this is Tier 1 or Tier 0 in GOAT format. I'm not telling you to go build this and go run it at GOAT World Championships, because that's definitely something that exists. This is not a deck that you play for consistent results or sheer power. This is a deck that you play because nothing feels better than winning by the alternate win condition of Exodia the Forbidden One. You play this deck to have fun and to flex on people. And of course there are going to be plenty of cards in here that you recognize from other Exodia decks or other Exodia deck profiles. But I am really excited to show you my secret sauce and why I think this Exodia deck is uniquely fun to pilot. So first things first, can't have an Exodia deck without Exodia. If you have all 5 of these cards in your hand at the same time, you reveal them and you win instantaneously. They cannot solemn you. They cannot prohibition declare Exodia the Forbidden One. There is nothing you can do. Yes, it is possible to use spell speed 2 effects to draw cards during your opponent's battle phase when they are swinging lethal at you, to draw the final piece of Exodia to win before the attack connects. And I've done it, and it feels fantastic. Looking at the rest of the monsters, the main engine of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Emissary of the Afterlife. It has 1600 attack and 600 defense, and when it goes from the field to the graveyard, by any means, doesn't have to be battle per se, both players go into their decks, search for a level 3 or lower normal monster, and put it into their hand. The operative thing here is that other than the head of Exodia, which is an effect monster, all of the arms and legs are normal level 1 monsters. Emissary really takes people by surprise. A lot of people do not know about this card because it is so niche, and you are going to watch your opponent sit across from these emissaries and just try to do the math on whether they can swing into you without handing you the game because they're giving you a search for one of your win condition pieces. That's our only 3 of in the monsters. We have a couple of 2 ofs, and this one is probably not going to be surprising to you. 2 Magician of Faith. Just a little flip effect monster that lets you return a spell card from your graveyard to your hand. For those of you who are maybe new to GOAT format, spell cards in GOAT format are broken. Especially Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, which are broken in any deck, but they're extra broken in a deck that wins if it simply draws enough cards. And just beyond being like worth running on their own, there are some extra little shenanigans that we can pull with these that I will get to in a moment. Our other 2 of in the monsters, we have 2 Night Assailants. Night Assailant is another small flip effect monster that, when flipped, destroys one of your opponent's monsters. Very simple, but that's not all. When they are discarded from your hand, you get to choose another flip effect monster in your graveyard and add that back into your hand. Night Assailant is limited to 2 in GOAT format and actually was this year, I think, errated so that it can't get back other Night Assailants because that's a, infinite loop. But at this stage in the game, pre-errata, fantastic with Graceful Charity, for instance. Draw 3 cards, discard 2, and then each of the assailants can bring the other one back to your hand. So here's the thing about Exodia decks. There's really 2 kinds. There's the FTK kind that use, Royal Magical Library and stuff like that to try to just draw through your entire deck on the very first turn before your opponent gets to interact. And then there's the ones that actually play the game. I think those are more fun to play. It's more fun for your opponent as well. But if you are playing it that way, you are going to be under pressure the entire game. It does take quite a while to dig through your deck or to set up the value engines that are going to let you find your Exodia pieces. So you're going to end up having to do some kind of stalling, some kind of pushing back against your opponent's pressure. So the Knight Assailants being able to pop their threats is great, buys you time, and their secondary effect to retrieve flip effect monsters from grave is wonderful, specifically because of the 2 Magician of Fates. Recycling these is one of the ways you can win. So Knight Assailant does quite a lot for us, and we'll run both. The rest of our monsters are 1-ofs, but that does not mean that they are not some of the most important pieces in the deck. And I'm thinking specifically of Sangan and Cyberjar. Now, Sangan's obviously great in this deck. When it goes from the field to the graveyard, you get to search your deck for a monster with 1500 attack or less and put it in your hand. All 5 pieces of Exodia fall under Sangan's jurisdiction. So if you are able to keep recurring Sangan, you know, with Call of the Haunted and Premature Burial, and have it keep going to the graveyard, you can get those pieces. You obviously want to start by getting the head of Exodia when you search with Sangan, because that's the only one that cannot be searched by the emissaries. But I actually only use Sangan that way in the late game. Once I already have a couple of pieces of Exodia in my hand and I'm trying to sort of close it out. If you see Sangan in your opening hand or in the early game, you may actually just want to go into Cyberjar. Cyberjar is one of the wildest cards ever made, I think. Another flip effect monster that you can get back with Knight Assailant. When you flip it, it destroys all monsters on the field, and both players flip over the top 5 cards of their decks. All the level 4 and lower monsters go onto the field, and all of the spells and traps and bigger monsters go into your hand. So Cyberjar accomplishes multiple things. It can interrupt an opponent's battle phase if they start marching in with a bunch of monsters, because it just wipes the board of them. The second thing Cyberjar does is that it lets us find our Sangans, for instance, or our Magician of Fates, or our Emissaries of the Afterlife, and flood the board with them. It can really set our value engines going. And the third thing Cyberjar does is just sheerly refill our hand. Against most decks, we are going to often find ourselves with a lot fewer cards in our hand than our opponent does. One, because they're running a bunch of stuff, all sorts of, removal and answers to stuff that we are not, putting in front of them, and so they just get to save those answers. And the other thing is, our stuff isn't very sticky. We have these small monsters that go away, and a lot of what we're going to be doing is kind of just trading. Like, we're just going to be cycling through stuff. We're going to be, playing a lot of cards that just, replace themselves and then go away. And so, yes, putting a bunch of cards on our opponent's board and into their hand with Cyberjar sounds kind of scary, but they already have a bunch of cards, and we don't. No matter how many cards in your hand, there's only so many that you can make use of. So this really benefits us. Cyberjar is one of the reasons that I, wanted to run Exodia in GOAT format as opposed to Edison or something else. I really cannot stress enough how well set up you are if you can resolve Cyberjar's effect early in the game. You probably won't be surprised to see either Tsukiyomi in this list or Dekoichi, the battle-chanted locomotive. Tsukiyomi is a spirit that goes back to our hand at the end of the turn, but when it's normal summoned or flipped, it lets us target any monster and flip it back face down. Really important card in GOAT format for lots of different decks, but does a whole lot for us specifically, especially if you can hide behind, a gravity bind or something like that and take the pressure off. You absolutely can win games by normal summoning the Tsukiyomi every turn, flipping down a Magician of Faith, and flipping it back up to get, a big draw spell. You can also flip Dekoichi back face down so that it can be reflipped and draw a card. I used to run 2 Dekoichis, but usually if I see one, that is plenty. It's just not one of the key cards of the deck, and we want to dig faster than that. But I only have one ulti Dekoichi anyway, so it works out. Spirit Reaper is here simply because of how sticky it is. Like I said, a lot of our stuff is not sticky, and it's just going to get attacked over, and sometimes we want it to get attacked over. But I have noticed that Spirit Reaper is really hard to answer in GOAT format. There are answers to it, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of answers, Snatch Steal and so forth. But they gotta have it. One is just really nice to have. And our last monster is the real oddball here. It's a Guardian Sphinx. Guardian Sphinx is one of the few monsters in the game that you're going to want to tribute set, because when you flip it face up, you return all monsters your opponent controls to their hand, and it has the Pac-Man effect of being able to flip itself back down into face-down defense position so that you can do it next turn. Nice 2400 defense. Resetting your opponent's whole board of monsters every turn is kind of significant. It kind of buys you a lot of time. Yes, they will answer this sooner or later, but they'll have to use an answer on it. You know, they'll have to use like a Ring of Destruction or a Nobleman of Crossout, which, frankly, is better used on this than on Cyberjar or Magician of Faith or something else that is an integral part of putting Exodia together. That'll do it for the monsters. For the spells and traps, I'm going to mix them together because there's just a few distinct genres of card that we have in this deck. And the first one, obviously, we're going to want to draw some cards. So here's a Pot of Greed, and here's a Graceful Charity. You know you were going to see these. But we also have the Upstart Goblins, the two that we're allowed. These just give our opponent 1,000 life points and let us draw a card. They can have all the life points they want, we don't care. And we are doing the 3 Jar of Greed, just a trap card that just draws you a card. This little U-shape down here, these guys, basically just mean that we're playing a 35 card deck. And occasionally the Jars of Greed, you know, will bait out a Mystical Space Typhoon or some kind of removal. But like I said, a lot of piloting this deck comes down to using one of these, getting in your graveyard, and recycling it with Magician of Faith. If you see one of these in your opening hand, you're golden. So Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, just more reasons why GOAT format is the format for Exodia. If draw power is the most important thing in the deck, the second most important thing is absolutely recursion. So we have our Premature Burial and our Call of the Haunted. You know what those are. They bring a monster back from your graveyard. And we have our Monster Reincarnation and our Dark Factory of Mass Production. These two, like I said, for Sangen, for Emissary of the Afterlife. The bottom two bring monsters from your graveyard back into your hand. The Dark Factory puts 2 normal monsters from your graveyard into your hand, exactly 2. And the Monster Reincarnation lets you discard a card to put any monster card from your graveyard back in your hand. Over the course of GOAT events, it may happen that your opponent plays Delinquent Duo or Donzalug and pitches cards out of your hand. This card is so prevalent in GOAT format that you should actually expect some of your Exodia pieces to get discarded somehow, and that's fine. That's actually really okay. Like, do not be afraid in this deck to take, you know, the left arm of Exodia and set it to protect your life points. Because until you actually have assembled Exodia, it's not doing anything in your hand. It's just sitting there. And if your opponent sees Exodia pieces in the graveyard, they will lower their guard. They'll think like, oh, well, I mean, you're toast. Your win condition is gone. And then when you're ready, you drop, you know, one of these and you put them right back in your hand and boom, you got it. Do watch out for Soul Release and Kaiku the Ghost Destroyer though. People main deck Soul Release, apparently. How was I supposed to know? In order to win, we have to not have lost. So we are running 2 Gravity Binds and 1 Messenger of Peace. Yeah, technically the 2 Gravity Binds probably should be level limit area Bs because Jinzo is a pain. But here's the thing. We do want to slow our opponent down, but because of the emissaries and because of Sangen, we actually kind of do want them to attack sometimes. I've been in so many games with this deck where I have a bunch of searchers out, a bunch of emissaries, and they just sit there. And I don't get any closer to my win condition. What I like about Messenger of Peace is that it has a life point up, you know, maintenance cost that you can choose to not pay and just let it go to the graveyard. Come to think of it, that's actually another one of the big functions of Guardian Sphinx. Good to have a way to get your own emissaries and Sangens off the battlefield by tributing them. The other important card that lets us trigger our searchers is the Torrential Tribute. I'm not super in favor of running removal in this deck. It's better to just consolidate all those slots that would go to removal into the floodgates, the Gravity Binds. But sometimes you do just get overwhelmed and you just have to reset the board and buy yourself one more turn because you're under too much pressure. And Torrential Tribute lets you do that while putting emissaries into the graveyard to search. It's kind of like the Night Assailants, like the removal is good, but we need another reason to run it other than that it's removal, and that's a really worthwhile reason. But we do want to protect those floodgates, so we have 2 Solemn Judgments and 1 Magic Jammer. The Magic Jammer is really mostly for Heavy Storm and Mystical Space Typhoon, although what I learned playing Vic in that first game is that Thousand Eyes Restrict creates a huge problem for this deck because it can suck up face-down monsters. So Metamorphosis would be another really great target for Magic Jammer. And you know, just most of the time, like I said, your opponent is going to have a lot of cards in hand, but very few of those cards are actually going to be useful. Very few of them are going to get around what you're doing. Usually it's going to be Jinzo that does that, or BLS. And so, you know, whenever that one card appears that's going to create problems for you, you can solve it. Very, very important. There's an argument to play 3. but I think 2 gets the job done. We're down to our last 4 cards in this deck profile, and these are going to be the ones that really make it purr. And they're both 2-ofs. One of them is going to be the Shallow Grave, 2 copies. Both players go into their graveyard, choose a monster, and set it in face-down defense position. If you've been watching the Duelist Heritage Progression draft, you know that I'm kind of obsessed with this card and the potentials of it. Yes, it's effectively a -1 in that it's replacing itself on your side and giving your opponent something for free. But as I have said now many times, most of your opponent's things, they don't need them. It doesn't help them. So functionally what this lets you do is recycle Magician of Faith, recycle Cyberjar, recycle Sangen Emissary, and then just say to your opponent, come at me. So it's definitely a finicky card. It's not the kind of thing that's going to be immediately live every time you draw it, but the ceiling is through the roof. Final 2 cards I'm going to show you are the secret reason why the Shallow Grave is so good in this deck, and it is Compulsory Evacuation Device. It's chainable, that's nice. Doesn't really solve problems for the most part, but let me propose to you the following scenario. Imagine, if you will, that you have 2 cards face down, and Exodia the Forbidden One is in your graveyard, out of reach. And in this situation, you can do the following thing. Activate Call of the Haunted, or as the case may be, a Shallow Grave, or a Premature Burial. You may target this Exodia the Forbidden One to summon it to your field. You may activate Compulsory Evacuation Device to return this Exodia the Forbidden One into your hand. And if it so happens that the other cards in your hand are the other 4 pieces of the Forbidden One, then congratulations. You have won a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! At spell speed 2 on your opponent's turn. That is the reason why Compulsory Evacuation Device is actually my favorite card in the deck. People don't see it coming. It's versatile. Running this Exodia deck is like this live puzzle that you're solving. You are just trying to draw as many cards as you can, but you're also trying to engineer this situation where, you know, you've put certain pieces of Exodia in different places, and you can move them around and put them from here to here or here to there, and it's just so satisfying when, you know, one of these combos lets you win out of nowhere. So that's the deck, 40 cards. As with all of these deck profile videos, I prefer to just give you a couple of ideas on what to side. I've definitely made use of Breaker the Magical Warrior and MST. Necro Valley creates a huge problem for this deck, for instance, because of that combo that I just showed you. And it is nice that Breaker has a little bit of attack power on him. I was able to Exodia at least once every round in this tournament, but there are definitely games with this deck that you know, find a way to piece a win together without Exodia. And depending on how your opponent sides, like having the 3 Emissary of the Afterlife with 1600 attack does let you pressure, and like Breaker is kind of back up for that pressure. Some more, you know, utility beaters. It's worth keeping Kaikus around here in order to protect your graveyard, you know, stop stuff from being banished. And of course, if your opponent is playing a heavy Chaos deck, Tribe Infecting Virus, I think, is just totally worth having here, along with a Lightning Vortex. These are basically, you know, kind of the same purpose. The Thousand Eyes are strict, the Jinzo, just whatever's bugging you, these can take care of it. And the fact that both of these discard a card from your hand can trigger those Night Assailants and, you know, help you put together those, you know, loopy, fun wins. A really nice third piece of spell trap removal I like is Swarm of Locusts, something else that you've seen me do some fun stuff with on the Duelist Heritage Progression draft, along with a Swarm of Scarabs. These basically just like prevent stalemates, right? And it prevents your opponent from outpacing you in advantage so significantly that you can't recover. Well, that's all I got for you today, folks. I hope you enjoyed my take on Exodia. Please let us know in the comments how you like to summon the Forbidden One. And if you enjoyed this, we have plenty of other old school content on our channel here for you to check out. And we really do appreciate those comments and those subscriptions. Until my next first place, this is Alessio signing off.